London Bridge is falling down. Okay, I got it hooked up. Okay, gentlemen. So let's start our Tuesday. So this is 8 o'clock in Israel. Today is Tuesday, 22nd of February. It's an interesting day. 2 all twos. The 2nd February. Of course, if we go by the Jewish calendar, it's not as significant. It's 5,782. Also two on the end, however. And we're doing our weekly Zoom on the subject of good friends talking about thoughts, life, and Torah, God, beliefs, whatnot. Last time we started on the concept of face versus signs, of face and signs. Who has any comments? I have some thoughts to continue on this, but let's see, Adrian and Mandy, Menachem Mendel, what other thoughts you might have to add before we get going on that?
Well, I'd like to hear Menachem's thoughts.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know. Phrase the question again.
No, last time we talked about faith versus science. And
Yes.
basically we said, listen, how do we make decisions? In other words, if I look at something happened, not a minor thing, but something significant, I want to make sense of that. I'm disturbed or I'm shaken up. And I say, this really should be black. And the Torah says it should be white. Do I say, well, if Torah says white, it is white. And the reason I think it's not white, I think the reason it's black, because either I think the Torah made a mistake, Torah obviously doesn't make sense, or maybe in this particular instant, Torah doesn't make mistakes very often, but in this case, maybe it made a mistake because my common sense, everything that I know, my background, my parents, my education, my life experience tells me it cannot be black, it's white. So Torah made a mistake. Or do I say, Torah makes everything okay? If Torah says it's black, even though it looks to me white, it's black. And if I'm not a curious person, I say, I don't care. If Torah says it's black, it's black. I don't have to worry about it, it's white. But if I'm a curious person, like if I'm an engineer or the doctor, or the person who tends to be logically inclined, analytically inclined, I might be curious. I might go to the library and spend next 2 months or 2 years searching and finally coming to a point, I guess I didn't see it right. I thought it was white, but Torah said it's black. And after 2 years research, guess what? I'm surprised. It really is black. And the reason I thought it was white, because I didn't understand. Or will I will not even come to this conclusion? So how do I make these decisions? Do I go what Torah says as a given and then calibrate my understanding, my psyche, my physics to that? Or do I have my intellectual, innate understanding of right and wrong or facts? And if the Torah doesn't go with this, my understanding, with my logic, then I say, Torah is just doesn't make any sense. How do I make the decisions?
Right. Okay. Sorry, I missed it the first time you said it. I was just dealing with settings over here. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. So how do I make decisions, or how do I understand things if they don't necessarily fit with logic, or the Torah seems to contradict logic? Well, I think in general, it's not just Torah. In life, there are a lot of things we come across that we do not understand. And I think it's perfectly normal and fine to not understand things. And when we come across something we don't understand, either we try and figure it out, or we put it into that not understanding box in our head, and it can stay there for some time until we get a further understanding. And when it comes to Torah, there are a lot of things, I wouldn't say more things, but there are a lot of things that sometimes are not readily understood at face value. Sometimes they take more time to understand, and sometimes they have a deeper understanding. It's not a literal understanding. So yeah, I mean, it's the same with anything. You can read anything in science, and sometimes you don't understand it, and you need to look into it more, and then you'll figure it out, or you're still perplexed even after you've already read it and studied it as much as you can. You still don't understand it. And I think that's there's more things in life we don't understand than we do understand. And I think the more we learn, the more we understand how little we actually do understand.
Let's say before Adrian jumps in to respond to your point, let me just say, I'm not talking about the subtle things that can be not quite clear. I'm talking about something blatantly contradictory or counterintuitive. For example, if I say a drop, if I'm reading a Talmud and it says the drop of the ink drowns 3 million people.
Mm-hmm.
Drop of the ink drowns 3 million people. Do I have to say, how can the drop of the ink drown 3 million people? Are you guys crazy?
So you've got to understand it's very strange to understand what it means. You know, the power of words or the power of the pen can cause more damage to people's lives than other things can. So, what does it mean, the power of one drop of ink? It could mean someone wrote something or signed a document, or the king signed a document that affected 3 million people and ultimately killed them. That could be what it means. I don't know. I haven't seen this line. But obviously, when you read something and you don't understand, obviously a drop of ink can't drown 3 million people. Obviously, you have a question there. And obviously, at face value, you don't understand what it means.
Well, let me keep calibrating further. Yeah. Let's say Torah says that Yaakov went from Beersheba to Luz in one day. I don't remember exactly. And today, if I go ahead from Beersheba to Luz, if I walk there, it takes me 3 days or a week. So I'm saying it's physically, even on a motorcycle, it will take me a day. How can I say the Torah says it took him, like, say, 2 hours to get there? Can I really believe it? It's impossible. If Torah would say that Yaakov went from New York to Tel Aviv in 15 minutes, am I to believe that?
Okay. So there are medrash and places where it talks about the concept of kfitzas haderech. There's also the story of how Eliezer managed to get to the well so quickly when he left Avraham. He managed to get straight to the well to find Rivka. How was it possible to do that so quickly? He left in the afternoon, he arrived in the evening, so
and there are a lot of all the fruits. He brought all the fruits and delicacies to give to
so there are a lot
go spoiled?
There are a lot of questions like that. Okay. And it talks about this concept of kfitzas haderech and the ability to go faster through places, travel. What it means, how it works, I don't know. I believe it. I believe this to be true. I can't prove it wrong, and I can't prove it right. And therefore, I choose to believe that it is true until proven otherwise.
But let me say that I'm going to pass it to Adrian in a second. Let me just say this. Let's say today, if I say the light goes 300,000 kilometers an hour, and somebody went from, and I go to the spaceship and I get to somewhere that is 1,000 light years away. And I get there and I go there and everything's fine. If somebody told me that today, I would say it's complete nonsense. But if I do not a very convoluted logic, but if I say, but if they put me to sleep, I mean, Adrian can help with it also as a doctor. Somehow they put me in a state of amphiosis, whatever that's called it, that I'm kind of like all my senses, they give me this chemicals, whatever the scientific chemicals do, and I'm asleep, in a frozen ice. And I'm flying there for 300 million years. But when I get there, they rewind, I open my eyes and I'm walking around there. So from that standpoint, say it's impossible to make the distance of 1,000 light years for the human being, because we only live, let's say, 100 years. And yet the person left when he was 30 years old and he arrived when he was 31 years old, and yet he traveled 1,000 years. So scientifically that can be explained. But if somebody tell me without having this knowledge, I say they're nuts. It's impossible. So
there is a story in the Talmud. There's a story in the Talmud of someone who saw someone planting a tree, and he asked him why he's bothering planting a tree if he's so old. I don't remember the story exactly.
Yeah, his son.
He fell asleep and he woke up once the tree was fully grown. Yeah,
it was Honi, I think. Yeah.
Look, there are a lot of stories like that. There's many stories like that, and whether they are allegorically, metaphorically, there are a lot of things we don't understand, and that's fine. It's okay to not understand something, and it's okay to believe something. Most things we think we understand, we don't understand in life. We don't even understand what quarks are and what atoms are. We have no idea what they are and where they come from.
We don't understand. Okay.
This is
All
the
right.
basic, the foundation blocks of matter. You know, we don't know what it is.
Let's
Anyway.
live in that, Adrian. So now we're having. I brought some question that specific examples how a normal person question is really possible. Menachem Mendel saying something we just can't understand it, and he's saying, well, I just believe Torah says it does. I don't know why, but it just does. Adrian.
All right. First of all, the first step depends on whether you intrinsically believe that the Torah is some divine inspired or divine written document. Now, if you start with that premise, as you do, presumably a Menachem Mendel, then when these things come up that sort of don't seem to be physically possible, then you have to go into another realm where you explain them either as allegory. You know, it didn't really mean that in one day he traveled a 10-day journey. It's to imply something about going from A to B. But that's if you believe that the Torah is intrinsically a true book that is divine inspired. Now, if you don't, which I don't, I like the Torah a lot. The Torah is the bedrock of our people. And as a supporter of our people, I read every week the Parsha. I enjoy the stories. I very much enjoy the value messages that it contains, which we said before, are the basis of much of Western civilization's values and morals. From that perspective, I enjoy the Torah very much, and the Tanakh, and I particularly enjoy the Nevi'im because they really addressed the people and exhorted them to be better human beings. That's my enjoyment of it. Now, if you believe that the Torah is a divine, inspired, correct book, then you have to come up with explanations. Now, Menachem Mendel says there's so much we don't understand. I really take objection to that because there's a hell of a lot that we do understand. He may not know what a quark is. He may not know what a neutrino is and so on, but I do. I don't understand the complex atomic physics of it all, but I know that had I studied that, I probably would. And there are a lot of people in that business who are utterly brilliant and they do understand those things. So it really depends what your starting point is. To say, well, if there's something in the Torah that doesn't make sense, it's because I don't understand it. That's a cop-out. That's an excuse. That's a way of saying, all right, I don't understand it because I'm not deep enough, I don't know enough and so on. And actually, sometimes it's just a bloody mistake. Or sometimes it's to imply something that in physical reality may not be possible, but in teaching you a lesson is possible. So, that's my point of view. I don't believe it's intrinsic. I think that the Torah was not written by Moses when he was up on Mount Sinai, dictated by God, or as some others believe, it's not min hashamayim, but he was inspired and so on. To me, that's not feasible. I think it was written by people hundreds of years later who wanted to capture what happened, who wanted to capture the essence of our history. So that's it. It's very easy. But to say, oh, well, because it doesn't make sense, it's because we're not clever enough to understand it, that's a cop-out. That's an excuse. I can do that anytime I like. I can say, oh, no, I don't understand it. I'm just not clever enough. When actually, if the Torah says something is black and you see it as white, well, there may be some other, I don't know that's not a good example because I haven't seen, you have to give me a better example. But if that's what it says, then you have to say, okay.
I give you an example, Adrian. The example is, and actually we discussed it with David a couple of times. The science says, I'm not sure which science, but some scientists saying that camels were domesticated 2,200 years ago. The Torah says that Abraham had camels and camels all over. That's roughly 4,000 years ago. So according to the Torah, Abraham and Rivka rode the camels. According to scientists, at least most maybe secular scientists or non-secular, I don't even know about this research, but I'm told the scientists claim that camels were domesticated 2,200 years ago. So if camels were domesticated 2,200 years ago, Abraham couldn't possibly ride them. Torah, therefore, is making a mistake. Or the Torah observant Jew would say, scientists don't know exactly the facts. Scientists made a mistake. How they made a mistake, I don't know. If the guy makes a carbon study, whatever the carbon imprint they do.
Nanodating.
Whatever they do, whatever machine he puts in and spins it and checks it, that's maybe.
No, look, in some of these measurements, like carbon dating or so, sometimes there are mistakes, but in something as simple as when a camel was domesticated, if there is good archaeological and all sorts of other evidence that's reliable, and I'm willing to believe that there's some mistakes in that, but let's say there is, and yet the Torah says that Abraham rode on a camel, it's quite simple for me to say, look, it would have made sense to the people writing down these books we call the Torah several hundred years later. They didn't know when the camel was domesticated, but in their time, the camel was domesticated. So it's not unreasonable to say, Abraham may have had a camel. That doesn't bother me in the slightest. And I don't have to go, oh, it's so deep, I don't understand it, or the archaeological evidence.
Okay. That's okay. But so what you're
saying,
there
are camel bones, and
So what you're saying in that sense, that essentially, it's an actually brilliant points, guys. We're making it very good. I think we're together. We're really together. Adrian said it very well, summarized for us, that it really comes from your starting point. If you happen to believe that Torah is divinely given and therefore faultless, then everything else, if it doesn't match, is in error, and then people have to do more work to prove or find out. Or if you believe that Torah that is a more scientific explanation to things, and Torah is written later on, that's belief. There are two different systems, each one his own point. Neither of the systems can prove one versus another one. Like in the camel's example, Adrian, you're saying, okay, the Torah guy says camels were 4,000. If the Torah says camels were 4,000 years ago, that's where a scientist, I'm not a scientist, but somehow you guys made a mistake. Scientists saying, I know the camels will not domesticated. So whatever you guys, Torah guys, believe, you made a mistake. Maybe it wasn't the Torah. Torah was written later.
You see, as far as I'm concerned, but Lev, it's not a mistake in the sense that the calculation when you do your accounts for your taxes and you add up the figures wrong, that's a different type of mistake. The mistake is that it's not really a mistake. I mean, it is a mistake, but it's that, look, they had the feeling that Abraham should have had some kind of something to ride on. And, there were camels in their day, so they thought maybe he obviously had a camel. It doesn't bother me at all if they said, oh, there was camels. And I know in my heart that when people have examined remains and archaeological digs, and there's some camps which they know what the date was, and there were camel bones there, say, okay, camels were here. But if you go back to an earlier camp that's, been discovered and excavated from before, and they never ever found camel bones, well, it doesn't mean there weren't camels, because not all the bones survived, not all the bodies of these creatures survived. So I'm not bothered. I happen to think that maybe there weren't any camels in Abraham's time, but what the heck does it matter?
That's a good point, because I think there's a third position. I'll get to Menachem Mendel in a second for you to, but this third position, I think, is like this. Some people can say, I think my wife probably would say that you know what difference does it make? What matters? It's a third view. The third view may be somewhat closer to what the mix of our views together and averaging of our decision is. What matters is a moral and spiritual lessons of the Torah. If I'm learning the Torah and makes me feel good, like Adrian's called it heritage, makes me feel good for my nation, for my people. It also helps me to become a better human being, to help another person, to open up the soup kitchen, to do good things. If Torah teaches me that, does it matter if Abraham rode the camel or the donkey or the sheep? It's nothing. It's a small thing. Who cares? That's one position. Ultimately, the Torah is about the big picture, how goodness among human beings. But that's one position. But somebody would say, well, that's true. That's good about Torah. But nevertheless, I still am bothered. This is a Torah observant Jew would say, I'm still bothered that Torah, if the Torah says that camel had the ears the size of 5.5 centimeters, that means it was 5.5 centimeters and not 6.5 centimeters. Why does it matter? He will say, I agree, it doesn't matter. But the fact is, if it says in the Torah, that is true. So then that position is going to be, I don't even care what Torah says about it. It's not relevant to our life. And another Jew, not every observant Jew would even argue with it. Many observant Jews agree, you're right, it doesn't matter. Let's not talk about camels. Let's talk about how to make, open up the soup kitchen in Tel Aviv or in London and New York and help other people. And that's what we should concentrate on. And another judge said, no, but it still bothers me that the camel known 5'6". Menachem Mendel, what do you say?
I'm very curious about this
Camels.
perspective that Adrian has, and I'd really like to, if he's okay with it, to prod it and understand where it's coming from, or where the limitations of this belief is. Or you've mentioned it a few times. You say that you believe the Torah was written hundreds of years later than it was proposed to have been written by Moses on Mount Sinai. My question is, there's a lot of questions on it, but I think that the first question would be, when do you think it was written? And if it was written, and how do you think at that time it was accepted? How is it presented to the people in a way that it was presented, so much so that they took it, they believed in this so much that they passed it on to all their children? And part of what's written in here in the Torah is that all the Jews were at Mount Sinai and that they saw the Torah and they heard the Torah being given by God himself. So wouldn't the Jews perhaps protested that, especially Jews like who protest everything and question everything? How would it have been possible to have just made it up hundreds of years later? And especially the Seder, which we just keep every single year since we came out of Egypt, we've been keeping. So who made up the Seder? At what point did that start, where we're literally quoting things that are in the Torah? Like, how did this all happen if it didn't happen when it happened?
Okay, challenge for Adrian, of course.
That's no difficulty at all. I don't know why he's so puzzled. Look, there are movements in human existence, philosophical movements, religious movements, ideological movements, what have you, that get adopted. And they get adopted by the majority. I mean, I'd only use this as an example, but I will. In the United States of America, 75 million people voted for Donald Trump, who many of them will agree this is a shtick dreck. This is SD, 100%. But their reasons for accepting is because the other side, they thought, had lousy ideas, that even though a lot of the people I know who are, they were Trump supporters, I don't know about now, would say, look, I think he's a disgusting, immoral, foul human being
Adrian,
who doesn't have a single...
How did he get from the Torah to Donald Trump? You know what I mean?
We're getting there. I'm listening.
Explaining. Let me finish. Let me finish. I'm explaining that there are many reasons why 75 million people voted for him, when many of them would agree this is an unworthy human being. Because they said, look, I don't like him at all. I think he's an immoral, unworthy human being without a single good attribute. But what he says about China is okay. What he says about Iran is okay, and so on. And so therefore, I agree with those policies, even if I don't like him. But there are many reasons why there's such a huge number of people accept this, all right? Now, at Mount Sinai, there weren't 75 million people. There were maybe 300,000 or something.
No,
So
how do you know that? Where do you get that number from?
I don't know that, but how do you know? You're not telling me there's
I
75
don't know.
million.
I'm saying it's a
people.
belief. This is all part of the
no,
question. Where do you get the belief?
No, hold on, Menachem Mendel, be sensible. You're not seriously going to convince me there were 75 million people at Mount Sinai.
So the 14 million.
Hold on, guys. Wait a minute. From a Torah perspective, there was a 600,000 male, and
that's right.
And if you count female and children, it was roughly 3 million people. That from Torah. Now, but Menachem Mendel is asking.
All right, okay, but assuming that's
hold on. Menachem Mendel is asking a legitimate question. If you don't think there was 3 million people, how many people do you think there were?
I don't know. I'm not. There's something I can't calculate, but I'm sure
fair. That's fair. You don't know.
People can. You could say realistically what it's likely to be, looking at the size of the population so much later when there were numbers, etc., etc. But to me, to have a large number of people believe something, look, why did so many million people believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? I mean, my mother used to say that her mother said that Jesus Christ had one of the best public relations firms in the business. They convinced everybody.
So things like that are actually documented how that happened, even Islam. The thing is that by Islam, you had one man, Muhammad, and he had the personal revelation, and that was told to everyone. And over here in this Christianity, you had one person that had the revelation, and that was taught to everyone by the sword. It was taught to everyone. They had to, or else they'd be killed. Judaism wasn't that way. In the Torah, it says that God revealed himself to everyone. The 10 Commandments was in front of everyone. So how do you convince Jews that this was a revelation, a mass revelation to everyone, and not just to Moses? Either it happened or it was made up. If it was made up, how is it made up? How do you engineer that where everyone comes back with the same story?
You're making it too complicated. First of all, if you're in a group of a huge number of people and the majority are believing it, you'd have to be crazy to go against them. So you don't argue, you say, all right, that's what they believe.
But how did that belief start? How did that belief start? How would you engineer that belief? How would you do that?
Hold on a second.
But it's not uncommon. There are dozens and dozens of ideologies.
Hold a second, guys. Let me just kind of massage.
I want to hear this explanation.
Gentlemen, hold a second. Let me say this. Okay.
So surprising.
You're both making a very good point, but let me just summarize it a little bit. Menachem Mendel basically is saying, if I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, that basically what he believes, and there's nothing wrong how he believes, so Adrian believes and I believe. We all have our beliefs. Menachem Mendel saying that the Torah was witnessed, the revelation in Sinai was witnessed by approximately 3 million people, group. And unless we're a mass delusion, that revelation transferred to us over roughly 3,500 years into the day. That's his belief, I believe. You are saying, if I might be mistaken, are you saying, Adrian, that you don't know? You don't know how Torah was given. Do you believe that that the revelation in Sinai happened or not? If you believe in this, then you agree with Menachem. If you don't believe, it's okay too.
Not necessarily.
There's really no way of knowing, number one. Number two, if you're, after what they've been through, leaving Egypt, assuming all of that happened, which is also not totally certain, but they've been through Egypt, they've been through the Yam Suf and all this stuff, and they come to Sinai, and there's, thunder and lightning, which for people in those days was very, very influential on the way they felt and behaved. I mean, in those days, if they saw before that, if you saw an eclipse of the sun, you think, my
but
God,
how
the
do you
world's gonna
think,
come to an end.
God, Adrian, but how do you believe this specifically? Do you, I'm just curious, do you believe, and if you do or don't, it's fine with me. I love you the same way. But do you happen to believe that in Mount Sinai, roughly 3,500 years ago, there was a revelation of God, the way Torah describes to the Jews? Do you believe that or not?
No, I believe there was a phenomenon there that so impressed those people of a primitive age that if someone told them this is God revealing himself to us, they say, you know what? That makes sense
What
to
was
me
the
when I'm
phenomenon?
a Stone Age person.
But what was the phenomenon?
Well, it could be anything. I mean, there could be a volcano. There could be, God knows what, lightning and thunder and so on. I mean, if you would believe,
Adrian, but what you
wait,
saying,
let me give you an example.
but no, I'm saying, but what you're saying, the phenomena in the desert, in Sinai Peninsula, happened that 3 million people got spooked by the volcano and they produced the Torah belief. I mean, if I went to Hawaii and saw a volcano, I would not become a Hindu. It's very difficult to scare me to the point to become religious.
You're not a Stone Age person. I mean, there are phenomenon, for example, where thousands and thousands of people think they have a certain illness. They've all got weakness or blindness or something. This is a very well documented phenomenon, this mass, I don't want to call it hysteria, but this mass sort of belief. This is very well documented.
Okay.
It happened with the Aztecs. When Cortez went to South America, they thought that he was God who'd arrived on the ship like the prophets had told them. And they just bowed down to him and basically handed over the whole country to him. So,
all right, but I also, gentlemen, I want to mention something else. We got 7 minutes, but we're doing good. At the time of Exodus, 3,500 years ago, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Adrian just mentioned Stone Age mentality. The Jews came in the Stone Age. I thought that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then 400 years after Abraham, Jews in Egypt were not exactly country bumpkins of a Stone Age. This were, some of them were slaves, some of the artisans, some were doctors, they were lawyers, they were advisors to the Pharaoh. They were quite advanced class of people who are not spooked by the thunder and lightning very easily. Adrian, you don't think so? You think it was a bunch of just primitive monkey apes just coming from a Stone Age and got spooked by volcanoes?
No. See, you are taking my words and you're twisting them and adding an emotional aspect.
No, let me finish. I'm asking the question. If I'm wrong, correct me.
I'm not, Lev, I want to hear what Adrian, I want to hear his answer.
But in this current day and age, there are people who believe things which I think are outlandish. And some of them are lawyers and some of them are doctors. Let's get back to my favorite shtick, drag, jump. They believe and they're convinced that his view of economics or of foreign policy is right, that they will vote for him even though they think he's a foul human being. And these are doctors and lawyers and engineers and accountants and, leather workers and God knows what. It's not an unexpected phenomenon. So you seem to be surprised that people will do that, but people will. And I don't know why both of you are so surprised that people may not
I didn't.
adopt an idea that you may think that I may think is ridiculous.
Adrian, I have to say that I stay corrected. What you said makes sense, and it's good. We are correcting our common denominator. What we now agree, the Jews coming from Egypt were not the monkey and Stone Age, but they were quite serious people. But what you're saying, and I agree with you as I listen to you carefully, that even people with advanced psyche, with advanced mentality, can be mass hypnotized or mass confused or might whatever into some phenomena that causes them collectively to take some facts and allegorize them and change them to elevate it to something that really didn't happen. Am I saying
nowadays, let me just add a couple of sentences. Nowadays, it's a question of, is the alternative policy or explanation less or more acceptable? So in my case of the political decision, they say, look, he's a horrible, foul human being, but his idea of money is better than, Joe Biden's idea. So they're making a choice. Whereas back in those days, maybe there wasn't a choice.
Okay, but I'm just saying my question.
I'll get to
just to
Mehmet in just a second. I just want to say that. Can we agree on something, gentlemen? It's very interesting because Adrian and Menachem Mendel present different way, looks on the same issue. But can we agree on one thing? Can we agree that Adrian, you just mentioned, and Menachem Mendel also elaborated that something happened in Sinai Peninsula that affected our history? Menachem Mendel can say there was a Torah revelations. Adrian says some phenomena happened that caused them eventually. But do you agree that something did happen? Something, whatever, without qualifying what it is.
I don't know. He knows.
I don't know. It's a belief. It's a belief. Okay, yes.
Well, your belief is so strong that it becomes knowledge.
No, that's a different conversation. We haven't elaborated on that one yet. That's a whole nother conversation. Right now, it's a belief. What we're talking about right now, it's one of the 13 principles of faith. It's a belief. So, but my question here is, which I asked before, is if that could have been a volcano or whatever else happened, at what point was it made up and how was it made up? Because when you look at Islam, they tell you straight out it started with one person, and you know the history of how it spread. Is Christianity, we know the history how it spread. Buddhism, we know how it spread. It started from one person. All of these religions or these ways of life, we know where they started and how they spread and got popular. Judaism, we have a story which was true, wasn't true, but now you're suggesting that it was the actual Torah was written 600 years later, whenever it was. What is that storyline? Because I've never seen it documented anywhere, and I've never seen anyone on the masses agree or understand. So how do you propose that would have played out practically? Like what happened?
Adrian, that's a legitimate question because Menachem Mendel very clearly explained his line of logic. Even though he admitted there's just belief, I don't know, I just believe it. You have to, I think, also explain your line of logic.
Yeah, I think his analysis is far too simplistic. Let's take Christianity. And I have I've read a lot about this because it's interesting to me.
Gentlemen, we have a minute and a half.
Are we continuing until for another 20 minutes after?
Wait a minute. Christianity never took root until Constantine, Roman emperor, decided it's going to be the religion of Rome. And those days, you told your people, this is going to be your religion. You damn well know they're going to believe it. They're going to accept it whether they believe it or not.
Gentlemen, Adrian, hold on. Gentlemen, guys, we have a minute and a half left. Would you like to do a dessert session to get out and come back for another 20 minutes?
In another 5-10 minutes. Yeah. Not too long. But 10 minutes, sure.
How about 10 minutes? Okay. Log off and come right back for 10 minutes. We'll call it our dessert session.
Afikoman.
Afikoman.